Hi, today we're going to go over the second video in our World War I retrospective from Three Old Guys. And the game that we're going to be talking about today is Death in the Trenches. It's another strategic level game. If you missed our first video, we'll have a link in the description to it so that you can take a look at that one as well. And last but not least, we hope you'll like and subscribe to our channel. So, we're going to talk about Death in the Trenches. Originally, this game was published by an Australian designer called Shoots Games, who kind of did a tabletop publishing thing. They had some excellent games in their repertoire, and this particular one is a game on the First World War. You'll see that the rules are actually quite a bit more complex than they were for our last video in World War I. There's a number of different things that are added to this game which actually give it a tremendous amount of flavor and make it very fun. One of those is random events. We'll talk more about that in a little while. And then they've got the logistics and things like that. The interesting thing about this is while you still have army level markers for the most part, you actually track the number of divisions in each army so that and that's how you take losses in this game, is divisions will be eliminated out of your army, and then you can rebuild them during the strategic part of the phase. They'll talk about different restrictions on where you can put things, Western desert and alpine type things, Near Eastern restrictions, and so on. And the idea is basically talking about how movement changes on the different maps. And this another thing about this game that's fascinating is they actually include a somewhat generic form of colonial warfare, not hex-based movement anymore, it's area-based, but it's fascinating to take a look at how the colonial campaigns shaped out during the war as well. There's rules for combat, special weapons and tactics. There's also things about, for example, the Red Baron. So they include naval and air this time. And they also, of course, include fortifications, as everybody else does. And in combat, you'll have a number of combat strength modifiers for terrain, fortresses, entrenchments, so on and so forth. We have a set of rules on colonial warfare. We have special national restrictions for each country on what they can and cannot do. So, for example, you can't have the Germans conducting amphibious assaults all over the map. And they also talk about surrender, but they also discuss the way the Russian Empire broke up to the point where there's a number of different independent factions that are formed, and also you have Red Army units, and you actually get a little bit into the Russian Civil War. So it's a much more complete, in that sense, game than the World War I that we took a look at last time. Mind you, World War I was fun too, but this one's fun in a completely different way. Again, very complex in some ways, but once you get into the system, it actually plays very easily. So we have, for example, Arabs and Armenians in this game, something we didn't have before. Rules on Russian collapse. Talk about neutral countries, how they get into the war, whether or not they can get into the war. And then we go into game setup and how to set up the game for the first scenario and so on. Victory conditions, special events sheets, which we'll talk about more in a moment. And it basically just gives you a fairly detailed level of description on how things work. This is the Great Power setup chart, so you see where each army is deployed. One of the interesting things they provide on this game is a list of hexes. And in this case, not every hex has a city or a town in it, but they've provided a city for each hex on the map so that you can see what other little towns are in there. Not necessary to play, but it's certainly amusing to take a look at and talk about when you're playing the game. So, for example, if you want to have a major offensive at Alexandria, by golly, that's going to be hex 0911. That's going to have that fight go on. We now have event charts. And basically, these are broken out by different years, because certain events or more or less happen in certain years. And basically, when you pull a chit for that particular year, there's a list of special events that occur or can occur in that chit pull. So, for example, the Rape of Belgium, and this, other games would handle this with cards. And actually, cards are an excellent solution to it. This game handles it with the chit pulls and the different special events. There's over 500 special events in this game, and they all affect the game in some way, usually a minor one. But the point is, they really take you down the rabbit hole of World War I history, and you start seeing all the different things that actually happened to create, for example, the modern Middle East. It's really an excellent game simply for these events, if for no other reason. And the event charts go on. So 1915, 1916, you know, and 1917 over here, 1918 on the next one. So basically, the last half of this rule book is just the special events. And like I said, they had a huge amount of flavor. This game is tremendous fun, at least it was for me. And I learned a tremendous amount about World War I from playing this game, surprisingly. So, and some of them are kind of silly, you know. I mean, they'll have things like goose stepping. You know, the Germans decide to invent the goose step so that they can look better on parades. And it has a minor effect on the war, believe it or not. So, and here we have basically the sea control table, naval summary, parody, and it kind of gives you a feel for how the naval rules work. Again, the Navy is somewhat abstracted, of course, is actually heavily abstracted, but these basically give you a feel for how the rules work. We also have Entente power and Central power gas events. So special events occur that, and so what will happen is in a particular combat, you'll be able to add a certain number of strength points to your force for gas, for example. And usually that's only a one-time good deal. One of the other interesting aspects, like I said, is the colonial campaign, area movement, and some of them don't have any areas at all, really, other than the one. But basically, it forces the Allies to deal with the German colonies as well. This is what is modern-day Namibia, at that time, German Southwest Africa. Let's see, what do we got over here? This is German East Africa, which is modern-day Tanzania. And then there's the colonial, the Western Africa colonial sections, which in this case, there's... I can't remember the name of the place off the top of my hand. But anyway, it's Cameroons was the name of the place. They also had Gold Coast, Tonga, Australian Papua, and Weihaiwei, which was a city in China at the time that the Germans occupied that the Japanese wanted desperately. Actually, the reason the Japanese joined the First World War. Next thing we're going to take a look at is some of the charts and tables. You're going to need a little table space to set this one up because you're going to need space not only for the map, which is not huge, but you'll need space for the Colonial War and the Omnibus Markers track. You also have an off-map display sheet. You'll need space for that as well. Kind of gives you a feel for some of the things that you'll be dealing with is the either the Entente powers or the colonial powers. One of the things that they provided is what they're calling Wes Ernie's Dice Alleviation Table. Those of us who aren't role players are not used to having great handfuls of dice. For players for whom giant quantities of dice conjure up images of grubby, clammy, and weird trolls hiding behind their D&D screens, this table is designed to dispel those images and replace the large handfuls of dice with a mathematically approximate and more easily managed substitute. So they've actually given you a table to allow you to dispose of the extra dice and just get a feel for how you can roll certain other dice with and not have massive numbers of dice being bouncing around your table or in your dice tray, which is a nice little thing. We have cards for some Entente Power special events, okay? And that, I mean, they have events for everything. I mean, Mata Hari makes an appearance. This is the Entente powers. This is Central powers. This is the Central powers one. And again, these provide hints for special effects. They're fairly important. So, for example, the Flammenwerfer, the flamethrowers that were invented. Alpenkorps, the German special corps that was created for mountain troops that fought in Italy and helped win the Caporetto campaign, for example. Again, this is the original game as it came out of Australian Design Group. Or, I'm sorry, not Australian Design Group, out of Schutz Games. And here we have the map. You'll note that the World War I map basically covered this much space of this map, with a section for the Middle East down here, okay? In this particular case, we have a good deal more of Europe, and we also have some extra borders that are posted in here. So we have White Russia, for example, which Bielorussia nowadays, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Finland, Poland. All these things become players when Russia collapses because all these different countries start trying to achieve independence. So you kind of get a feel for how the game shapes a little differently. In this case, you don't really have any transit boxes because you have the entire Ottoman Empire depicted on the game, down all the way to Mecca. Also on the game, you'll see that there's a North and South India box for British forces coming out of India. So you start with that units actually there, and you can try to move them to Europe. It's a fairly complex map, and honestly, it's somewhat difficult to use because of the colors and textures they chose. You get used to it eventually, but it makes it harder to read than it really needs to be. But we'll take a look at another version pretty soon that hopefully fixes that. I don't know. We'll find out. So that's the maps. Finally, let's take a look at the unit counters. Again, this just came in a few days ago as well, actually about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So these markers are quite a bit different from the original ones that I saw. But you'll see each of the armies is rated, and then we'll have division markers, division max for different armies. So you can basically assign divisions to these, and then these numbers modify the combat value for the division. You'll also notice in this case, the Germans have a number of independent little armies that are actually national armies. So for Bavaria, Württemberg, Saxony, and I can't remember who the other one is. Anyway, so that kind of gives you a feel for that. The British have same kind of thing. The Russians do not, but then there's different little independent armies that can be created as a result of the revolution. National flags are used to represent these forces, even for the weird ones. So the Ottomans, they still have the Turkish flag. That's pretty straightforward. This particular group here is the Austrian national flag, somewhat simplified, the Austro-Hungarian national flag. But they also have some special forces there as well. The King's African Rifles for the British. They've taken a lot of time and effort to create counters that will allow you to simulate an amazing number of independent little forces. We even have a Chinese army on here for those colonial wars. There's over here, we'll see they even have a Brazilian corps that can come in. French armies and so on and so forth. It's a complex game, like I said, but it works surprisingly well. Again, once you get used to the idea of how the system works, which takes a turn or two, it becomes almost intuitive again, which is a sign of a good game, honestly. So this was the first edition. This was the one that most of us ordered back in the day when Shoots Games was actually still in existence and publishing this. So now you're thinking, why are you showing us games that we can't get? Well, you can get them. In the first video, you could get Deluxe World War I, which is still being sold by the new SPI Decision Games. But in this case, Shoots Games designs were so good that Compass Games picked this particular one up and published it as a box set. This came in a few days ago, and I have no idea what's inside this box, but I know I love the game Death in the Trenches. So we're going to open up this box and find out just exactly what's in here and how they changed it to make it better or easier or not, as the case may be. Again, the big attraction of this game, in my mind, is all the special events and the extra little history that you learn as you work your way through this game. So hopefully they'll retain that in this version, and we'll see what they did. So let's go ahead and open this box. Compass Games, they always have these things tight, which is good, actually. The inevitable Compass Games bags. Okay, so we have a rule book, and I'm guessing that's pretty straightforward, except better graphically, because that's one of the things they do when they do the deluxe things, is they include better graphics, and they also include things like examples of play, usually. But you can see the rules are well organized. There are certain things that are highlighted to make it easier to follow. If I can get these pages apart here. They've got examples of the units so that you can see how those work. We've got examples of the markers that are used. You can actually put divisions in reserve and commit them during battle. So it kind of gives a tactical feel for the game that you don't get in other strategic level games. This game is really interesting the way it was designed. Very impressive, really. Not what I would have thought of doing if I'd been designing it, but it's absolutely interesting to the way they tied everything together. So they have different political events, again, that are listed, and rules, special rules for different countries and so on. So pretty much the same as the last set of rules. Rules for the battle process. They've highlighted some things in blue to make it stand out so that you can see they're talking about. The multiple dice there that you have to throw. This one you have to throw a lot of dice to resolve anything. So let's see if I can get these pages apart. Again, just giving you a feel for it. They've got naval units in this game. They've got examples of the Red Baron and so on and so forth. They show how to use the tracks. They show how the forts look. It'll be interesting if the map's any better to read. They've basically show the Colonial War. That map looks better. British Gold Coast. That's interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to take a look at the maps. They talk about the Reds. They give you an example of the Reds for the Russian Civil War. And they go through the whole process, basically, of Russian collapse and surrender and Civil War sort of things. They talk about different organizations that can pop up once the collapse occurs. So, for example, we have the Armenian army and Armenian population centers and so on. And these basically allow the Armenians to rebel, if you will, against the Ottomans and fight back. Remember, there was an Armenian genocide conducted by the Ottomans before Hitler ever got around to murdering people. They also have some special units, like the Arab unit is for the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. And we also have, interestingly enough, a Senussi unit. A little known fact of the First World War is that the Senussi tribe rebelled against the Italians in Libya, and that fight went on for a number of years. So, again, they go into tremendous detail on what happened in the First World War on this. And like I said, it's worth it for the history alone, really. So they have some game errata, which is unfortunately also typical of Compass. They usually wind up with a lot of errata because, I don't know, I guess their editing process is a little offbeat. They've broken the events out this time into a separate booklet. Okay? And again, gives you a feel for kinds of different things. These are charts to track the number of divisions and so on that come in, and naval reinforcements and so on. So you get a feel for how the setup works. Here's that list of hexes that they had as a separate sheet in the original game. They've kept that in, which is good. Like I said, if nothing else, this certainly improve your geographical understanding of where places are located on the map. So that's a nice touch. Goes on for another page. Also, by the way, the print's bigger, which is great as I get older. And then we get back into the events. So you can see, again, just how many events. The rest of this booklet is basically 10 or so pages of events. So we already looked at these in the previous iteration, so we'll just flip through it pretty fast. But again, you can see what we're dealing with here. So huge number of special events that can occur in the game. And that's really kind of a nice touch. All right, let's take a look at what we got here. Looks like we have a couple of these. The Entente powers. This is basically the master chart. And you can see they've got some divisional limits listed. That's how many divisions can be in a certain unit or whatever. And then they have the number of the charts that allow you to track all the total number of divisions that you can have in your army and so on and so forth. So for the Entente powers. They also have one for the Central powers. Should be fairly similar. So get a feel for the divisional limits and units. Now, the way you track this is you have an army headquarters divisional max marker will appear on this thing, whatever it is, and then you'll have a divisional assignment for each army that will show up along the way. So again, Austrian, Ottoman Empire, Germany, and so on and so forth. One of the things that's common to both of these games, World War I, the one we looked at last time, and this one, is that you can lend mobilization or CRPs to minor powers, and in this game you can do the same thing. You can lend basically divisions to minor powers. So here we have a battle table that shows you how to the different powers' abilities to conduct combat, and then you have different places to put aside for different results on the combat results table. So next one, another battle board. Okay, kind of gives you a feel for how that shapes, and you'll see the different processes that you go through to fight a battle. It can be fairly complex the first couple of times you do it, so it's really important to pay attention to this particular chart, for example, for combat. And it's once you've gone through it a couple of times, it becomes much more intuitively self-evident what you're doing here. So we again have Entente power special events, okay, and Central power special events, as opposed to plain old events. So basically these, like I said, are usually things that involved either special operations or special weapons and tactics kinds of things. All right, let's get to the maps here. We have the Death in the Trenches colonial map, campaigns map. Pretty similar to the original, but in this particular case, they've improved the graphics quite a bit. Should be much easier to see your units on this map. And they've labeled the different colonies. So German Cameroons, German Southwest Africa, German East Africa. And then in this place, they've got different allied boxes for areas that you can use to stage invasions of different German boxes, and vice versa, theoretically. But normally that doesn't happen because the Germans don't have field units available in large numbers in that area. So we've got the counters here. We'll take a look at those in a little while. Let's get on with the big maps here. Again, it's one of those Compass Games specials, so the map boards are mounted, which is always a plus. And by the way, the Colonial one's mounted too. If you take a look at the thing, it's fairly thick cardboard, so that makes it a good deal sturdier than what we were looking at before. Now, well, yeah, one of the big advantages, again, to Compass doing this kind of thing is that they have created a map that is much bigger than the original one, because the hexes are bigger, which means that it's much easier to put units onto the map and maneuver them around on the map. And also, the graphics have changed enormously and make it much easier to see the units on the map. That is a huge plus there as well. Again, we still have the India box down here, and we have different holding boxes at the bottom of the map. You can see fortifications, on different countries and cities, the major cities. Remember, every hex has a city in it that they've listed somewhere. And one of the things that I didn't talk about on the original map was these snowflake symbols indicate that if during winter, these areas are really difficult to maneuver and fight in, because it's the Alps. So you would expect it to be really difficult to maneuver and fight in. Watch out there. I'm going to come off the edge there. And again, the northern part of the thing, keep in mind most of the combat that occurred in the First World War happened here, here, and here. And so really, that's the heart of the map, which is why the previous game that we looked at pretty much only covered those areas. So we also have the Near East here, though, and again, you can have everything from the Senussi revolt in Libya to, communist uprisings in different cities and forts and so on. They have some symbols up here, for example, for the iron ore that can come out of Sweden, which could be important to your war effort and so on. So again, beautiful map, well done, and I love that the hexes are bigger. That's fantastic. So it'll make it much easier to maneuver the units and see what's going on in the map. So that's a nice touch. And of course, it is mounted, like I said, which is always nice. So let's take a look at the unit counters now. Oops, there's the original unit counters. Let's slide those out of the way. See if I can get this without cutting anything bad here. There we go. So Compass is, I know a lot of people really like to trim the corners of their unit counters on their games. You'll remember in the original, so for example, they come out in a fairly typical war game print and die cut system, so the sharp corners and all that. A lot of people will spend hours clipping the corners on their counters, something that I've never really bothered to do because, frankly, it doesn't matter to me. But Compass Games decided to do all that for you. So here you see the different unit counters. This is the Austro-Hungarians right here, okay? And you'll note in this particular case, they've done some, quote, nationalities as well. So, for example, you have, like, Austrian armies. And these are basically to differentiate all the different kinds of troops that were in the Austro-Hungarian army, which can be a problem to the Austro-Hungarians. Up here we have the Germans, again, the nationals, different nationalities, Saxony, Bavaria, and so on. You'll notice that there can be up to 3 Bavarian armies, for example, and so on. We have assault units. They've done a pretty good job on taking these markers and units and turning them into something useful. Here again, we have the Armenians, for example. So you can have quite a little fight with the Armenians. British units. These would be the Russians. Note the Russian flag. Note also, by the way, that they've done a pretty good job on the flags. Only the Austro-Hungarians still are not, quote, properly depicted, but because, frankly, it's too difficult to do all that. The Austro-Hungarian flag was tremendously complex. Note you can actually have a Jewish division as well, which, again, is something to pay attention to because the modern Middle East came out of this war. So here we have the Ottoman Empire forces. Okay. We have Italian forces here. We have Serbians. We have different naval units, it looks like, for the British, French, Italians, Austrians, Japanese, and so on and so forth. We have Ukrainian units. We have Swedish units. We have a Brazilian division. We have American units, and so on. Again, really, really useful set of markers here and much better looking than the original set. The original set were hard to read. These are a little bit bigger and a little bit clearer, a little less cluttered. What do we got here? Oh, allocation of divisions to different units and so on and so forth. So basically, we finish out with some more markers covering different events and so on and so forth, and a couple of different units as well. So pretty much everything that you could possibly want in the First World War is in this game. And the deluxe version is available from Compass Games right now. It's absolutely beautiful. This is a game that takes a little bit longer to play than the first one we looked at. World War I you could play usually within 2 or 3 hours tops. The deluxe version probably would take 5 to 6 hours to play. This one is going to take you a weekend to play. But it's worth it simply to find out what goes on and to see how all these different events and special events affect how the war went on. It gives you a tremendous amount of insight into how the First World War developed. We'll be talking about a couple more strategic games in the next set of videos, but these are 2 of the most complex pure war games that are done, not card-driven or whatever. And it's well worth taking the time to learn these systems and play with them a little bit if you're interested in the First World War and how it affected your world today. Again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. If not, we'll try to do better next time. And in the meantime, enjoy.